The day has finally come where I read and review my first ever Joe Hill book. So let's read 20th Century Ghosts and find out if it's good or not. Welcome back to BG's Books. I'm Mr. BG, and today I will be reviewing 20th Century Ghosts by Joe Hill. So, I've been wanting to read Joe Hill for a little bit now. It started back when the first Black Phone movie was coming out, and now that the second one has been released and I want to see that, this is kind of what spurred me to do that. So anyway, I don't know how many of you know who Joe Hill is, but you've absolutely heard of his father. His father is Stephen King. So yeah, Joe Hill is Stephen King's son. And he goes by Joe Hill because his middle name is Hillstrom, but he didn't want to go by Joe King or Joseph King to, excuse me, because he didn't want to be known by like his father's son or whatever. He wanted to make a name for himself, and so he started going by Joe Hill. And this is like the second book he's ever published, as well as his first collection. But anyway, so there are a total of 15 stories in this little collection here. That's why their bookmark is in here for the contents page. But there is a like bonus 16th one, the acknowledgments, which I will get to in time. But yeah, for the meantime, of course, the Black Phone is in here. This is the major reason I read this. I did see the first movie, by the way. It was great, and I cannot wait to see the second one. But anyway, so yeah, if you're new here, what I do is when reviewing collections, I go through each story one by one and then review the collections versus the actual novels, where I just review the novels by summary. But yeah, so of course, let's get right into this. Alright, so getting into the stories, the first one we have here is Best New Horror. So Best New Horror is basically about, I think he's like a magazine publisher or whatever. He publishes stories in magazines, and then he's basically just kind of looking through the newest submissions of horror stories and choosing the best one to put into the magazine. So there's not really a lot to say about that one, because I don't really remember a lot about it. A lot of these earlier stories I don't remember too much about because you know, I read those like a week ago, and then the newer stories have just had a lot of stuff going on in them. So I don't really remember Best New Horror that well. But from what I remember about it, it was just fine. It wasn't really like great. It wasn't disappointing. It was just kind of fine. I mean, it's just a guy just looking through stories to see what the best one to publish is. That's just a regular publishing industry. So I don't really know. It's just fine. But anyway, so the second one is actually the namesake of this book, 20th Century Ghost. So of course, 20th Century Ghost, and it actually has a description for 20th Century Ghost on the back. Imogene is young, beautiful, and dead, waiting in the Rosebud Theater one afternoon in 1945. So, yeah, so basically this is just about a guy who runs the Rosebud movie theater, as the thing suggested, and he's flashing back to his childhood back in 1945 when he was a child, when he went into the movie theater and he sat next to this girl who happened to be a ghost. Similar to Best New Horror, I don't really remember a lot about this one because it was one of the earlier stories and so many things just happened in the other ones. But I don't know. 20th Century Ghost was just kind of fine, I guess. Same as Best New Horror. It wasn't like groundbreaking, but it wasn't terrible either. It was just kind of fine. It was a spooky story, and it also was the namesake for the entire collection as a whole. So there's that, I guess, but it's just kind of forgettable. All right, and then the third one I actually do remember pretty well is Pop Art. So Pop Art is one of the weirdest things I think I've ever read, and that's saying a lot considering the stuff I've read, especially this year alone. But Pop Art is about a boy who, back when he was a child, had a best friend that was inflatable. So I don't know if you remember these, but back when you went to like a theme park or like the circus. There was these like balloon animals of like characters like Spider-Man or SpongeBob or something, where they had like a stick attached to their head and you could just like walk them around. Well, Art, the name of the inflatable boy, is similar to that, but instead he doesn't have a stick in his head, and he is just like a fully like the height of a human. So basically, yeah, Art is very weird. He's inflatable. His family's inflatable. And yeah, basically Pop Art is just about a guy who had an inflatable best friend for a while. So, you know, there's that. That was very interesting. But yeah, I just remember being so confused by that one. It wasn't even bad. I was just very confused. I was like, what in the world did Joe Hill... I was basically confused as to whether or not Joe Hill was on some stuff when he wrote that or not. But knowing who his dad was, that wouldn't surprise me. Anyway, Pop Art was absolutely insane, but it was enjoyable. All right, so the fourth story in here is called You Will Hear the Locusts Sing, and similar to 20th Century Ghost, it has a little description on the back. Francis was human once, but now he's an 8-foot-tall locust, and everyone in Califora will tremble when they hear him sing. So yeah, just like that description suggested, Francis was once a human, but now he is an 8-foot-tall locust. And basically, he just starts to wreak havoc on the town of Califora. So yeah, not much to say about that one, but it was certainly more a traditional horror story that this book has. So think of like your body horror and stuff, like The Thing, if you saw that, or even The Fly. They even mentioned The Fly in the story. So something along the lines of that. So if you like movies like The Fly and The Thing and like body horror stuff, I think you would really like this one. And I found it weird, but it was really insane. And so, yeah, I enjoyed it. All right, and so the fifth story is called Abraham's Boys. And so Abraham's Boys is basically a pseudo-sequel to Dracula, if you will. So if you remember back a few months ago at this point, I reviewed Dracula and stuff, and I said that it was a bit of a boring book. And Abraham's Boys is kind of along the same line. It was also fairly boring. It wasn't that interesting. Basically, it just takes place like years after Dracula has ended, and Abraham Van Helsing, one of the characters who hunted Dracula in that book, has two sons, one named Rudy, and I think the other one is named Jack. And he just kind of trains them to be able to detect vampires and hunt vampires and stuff. So, I mean, that one is interesting. It's not one of my favorites, though. It's just kind of one of the more okay ones. None of these stories are bad, but this is just one of the ones where it was just okay more than anything. But yeah, so Abraham's Boys. I think it's also becoming like a movie or a show on Shudder like this month, which I did not know of before this. I just saw a trailer for it, I saw a thing on Instagram for it, like, a day or two ago, I believe, and I was like, oh, interesting. I just read that story not too long ago. So yeah, there's that. But Abraham's Boys, the story, it was just fine. All right, and then 6 is Better Than Home. So I don't really remember much about Better Than Home, not because it's one of the earlier stories, but because it's basically a baseball story, and I don't like any sports at all, so anything that has to do with sports kind of doesn't have my attention. And so Better Than Home was no different. Basically, this guy's dad is like I think is a coach for a baseball team, and then it's just mostly him and his dad bonding over whatever. And so yeah, as I said, baseball isn't my thing, so I didn't really connect to the story like I did some others. But all right, the 7th story in this collection is actually my favorite one, which is The Black Phone. So, of course, as you know, I already said, I read this specifically to read The Black Phone, to then see the movie, which now is a sequel, so I want to see that one as well. I've only seen the first one so far. But The Black Phone is my favorite story in this collection, and for good reason. So basically, if you've seen the movie or read the story, you already know the story of The Black Phone. This kid gets kidnapped by a weirdo and gets put in a basement of a house where his only company is a bed and a black phone. And towards the end of the story, the phone starts ringing, and it's dead boys on the other side who this psychopath has already killed. So yeah, very interesting ghost story, and of course it's my favorite. It's my favorite, as I've already said, and the movie is really good as well, so please go watch that. I'm excited to see what the sequel brings. But yeah, so the Black Phone, really great. Definitely my favorite part about this. All right, so the 8th story we have in here is In the Rundown. And once again, it's another baseball story, so once again, I didn't really care about it that much. I even remember less of it than Better Than Home, because at least Better Than Home had something to do that wasn't about baseball. So yeah, I just wasn't feeling it. In the Rundown, one of my least favorite stories in here. And the next one is The Cape. So The Cape is a very interesting story. Basically, when the narrator was a child, he climbed up in a tree after his brother threatened to kill him and stuff. And while he's in the tree, one of the branches snaps under him, but instead of falling down to get very hurt, he instead floats up in the air, which is very interesting. And he was wearing this blanket that he had modified into a cape at the time, and it was making him float. So, there's like a superhero. So then basically the story just kind of details his life afterwards, like going into adulthood, and then him rediscovering the cape and all that. So, I don't know, it's a bit of a strange one for a collection like this, but it's all right. Yeah, I like superheroes. I'm a big fan of Marvel, and DC is all right. So, yeah, The Cape is just a perfectly fine story, and it has a horror twist on a superhero movie. So kind of like Brightburn, but probably better than Brightburn. All right, and so the next story on here is Last Breath. So Last Breath is basically about this family coming into this museum with bottles where people have taken their last breaths. And, that's not really a normal thing that people collect. So the owner is being all weird and stuff about how this is X celebrity's last breath, or this is what this person was doing as they died and I got their breath. So it's a much more mainline horror that you would probably expect in a collection like this. It was fine. It's really short. It's actually 9 pages long. So it's the 3rd shortest story in this entire collection. But yeah, it was perfectly fine. It doesn't overstay its welcome, and even though the subject is kind of weird, why do you collect dead people's breaths? But yeah, it was interesting to say the least. And then this next one is Deadwood, which is hardly even a story. Basically, this one is just 2 pages long of just describing the woods. That's really it. So I don't really have a lot to say about that one. So we're just going to move on. That one was weird. All right, so after Deadwood, we have The Widow's Breakfast. So basically, The Widow's Breakfast is about this guy who train hops and stuff. And after jumping off a specific train to avoid a worse fate up north or something, he ends up at this old woman's house who basically, she's a widow now, and she basically just tells her backstory on how her husband has passed and all that, and that she gives him breakfast and treats him with kindness and then sends him on his way. So this one is more of a wholesome story than anything. It's probably the most wholesome one of this entire collection. So yeah, it's quite interesting to say the least, and I liked it. So Bobby Conroy Comes Back from the Dead is the next one, and this one is actually not what it sounds like. I was thinking it would be some sort of resurrection thing, but actually it takes place in 1978 at a mall where they are filming the George A. Romero movie, Dawn of the Dead. So I'm sure a lot of you have probably grown up watching Night of the Living Dead or even Dawn of the Dead, and this is basically a fictional story that takes place during the filming of Dawn of the Dead, where this man named Bobby Conroy and this girl he once knew back in high school and her son are zombie extras in this movie. And so it's basically just detailing the production of the movie and stuff. We get cameos by George A. Romero and Tom Savini. So that is very interesting. I've actually never seen Dawn of the Dead. I would certainly like to. But yeah, the story was very interesting. Little on the long side, but it was really good. All right, My Father's Mask. This one is just, I don't even know what's happening. Basically, these 2 parents take their son out to this cabin in the woods to avoid these card-playing people who I guess want to attack them and kill them for some reason. Anyway, long story short, in order to hide their appearance, they have to wear these mask things. And then stuff escalates from there. The child goes out into the woods and gets lost, and then, things escalate from there. This was definitely the weirdest one. This was the one where I was like, what's going on? Because I'm just going to spoil it. The story doesn't really explain anything that's happening. It just kind of happens, and then you're just supposed to roll with it. All right, and then so the final named story that we have in here is Voluntarily Committal. And I'm just going to tell you, this is my least favorite story in the whole collection. First of all, it's not even a story. It is a novella, because most of the stories in here are like 20 to 23 pages. That's standard. And then there's the ones that are like 2 pages. But this one is like 50 plus pages. And basically, it's this guy named Nolan who back in the 70s notices that his brother really loves to make cardboard box forts and stuff, like castles and mansions and fortresses and stuff. And after a terrible accident that he commits with a friend, he wishes for his friend to disappear. And then the brother kind of, has the friend disappear and stuff. And so that's very interesting. I mean, the story itself is very interesting, but I just think that because this is a story collection where nothing was over like 25 pages, all of a sudden to go to something that's like 50 something pages long, I just think that was a very weird decision for the publishers to make on this part. I would have either shortened it by like 30 pages or I just would have cut it out entirely. Because I mean, as good as the story is, it just is way too long for this collection. All right, and so this is where the acknowledgments happen, which is like at the end of the book. But there is a brief story in here called, I think it's Shahrazad's Typewriter. I don't remember the name. It was some sort of weird name. But basically, it was about this girl named Elena whose father had died while at his typewriter. And then when she goes down to see the typewriter, it starts working by itself and typing things. So, yeah, it's a haunted typewriter. So basically like every ghost story ever. But yeah, those are the stories, and let's see what I actually feel about them. So overall, 20th Century Ghosts is a pretty solid collection. As I said, there's no stories that I absolutely hated or despised, but there were a couple like the last one and Abraham's Boys and stuff where I was just less interested than other ones about. Of course, the main bright spot of this was the Black Phone, as I'm sure it is for a lot of people who have read the collection. And I'm no different. But anyway, so yeah, another thing I will say is that Joe Hill is like kind of a very hot topic right now, or very trending because of his new book that just came out, King Sorrow, with everyone reviewing that. So maybe I can get quite a bit of views going off that fame. I don't really want to be someone who jumps on trends, but what are you going to do, right? But anyway, as I said, 20th Century Ghosts is just a solid story collection. While not all the stories are winners, about 10 to 11 of these stories are just really great, and I highly recommend reading them either as a reread if you've read them before, or if you haven't read it before like me, go read it for the first time. It is actually incredible, and I cannot recommend it enough. So overall, do I think that Joe Hill is like his father? Yes, absolutely. Joe Hill decided to become another one of his father's people. He has stepped into his father's shoes and started writing horror. And his horror is about as solid as his dad's. And you know me, I'm a big Stephen King fan. So if Joe Hill keeps writing like his dad is, I think I'm going to be a big Joe Hill fan too. Anyway, as I said, this was the first Joe Hill book I've ever read. So I would love to hear what other Joe Hill books I should read. I have The Fireman and Nosferatu, as well as King Sorrow. But I don't know, his first book was Heart-Shaped Box, so maybe I should read that one too. But anyway, yeah, so please go read 20th Century Ghosts. But yeah, guys, that is it for the video. I hope you guys enjoyed my review of 20th Century Ghosts. And I would also love for you to know if you want me, or I would love to know if you guys want me to read any more Joe Hill, because I certainly want to. But yeah, also leave me suggestions of what to read in the comments below. I love reading your comments. But anyway, yeah, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe, all that stuff down below. I'm still very close to 300 subscribers, so I would love to reach there before the end of the year. That may or may not happen, but who knows. But anyway, yeah, once again, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I've been Mr. BG. This has been BG's Books. And remember, just a second. Hello?
Hello, this is Joe Hill, Stephen King's son. He hired me to keep you in here until you starve to death.
Aw, man. Okay, what do you want me to do?
The only way to escape is to beat up your editor because I hired him to block your door.
All right. Okay, I gotta go, guys. Editor!
K.O.
I finally got out.